Hello, Grumpy Old Fart here. I'm doing a movie review of the 007 Roger Moore era. My brother wanted me to, he suggested that I do the James Bond movies, but there's a whole heck of a lot of them, and a lot of them are very similar. So, rather than do individual movies, I'm doing the eras of the actors that played James Bond. I did Sean Connery, who, in my opinion, exemplified James Bond. He created it, and he's the best. The first is always the best, in my opinion. Very, very rarely is that not the case. However, and nobody could compare to Sean Connery. Nobody could. However, Roger Moore did about as well as anybody could. Roger Moore was James Bond from 1973 to 1985. And before I get into his movies, I gotta say one thing. During the Sean Connery era, he took a break, and there was a movie made, a James Bond movie, and then he came back and did another one. Well, while he was out, that one movie that was made was called On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and James Bond was played by an actor named George Lazenby. Did a good job, a really good job. It's a great movie. If I'm not mistaken, Telly Savalas was the villain in that one. And they were all really, really good movies, but I didn't want to slight George Lazenby because he made a good movie. Let's not discount the man. I was hoping he would make more because I enjoyed him as James Bond. But what can you do? And now we have Roger Moore. Roger Moore did 7 movies. He did Live and Let Die in 1973. He did The Man with the Golden Gun in 1974. He did The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977, Moonraker in 1979, For Your Eyes Only in 1981, Octopussy in 1983, and A View to a Kill in 1985. This, in my opinion, was a transition James Bond. When Roger Moore was Bond, we were deep in the Cold War, and the Russians were the bad guys, and blah, 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 blah. In Roger Moore's era, we were trying to end the Cold War, and we were transitioning from the Russians are bad guys to the Russians are just people who have a different ideology. And in some of these movies, for example, The Spy Who Loved Me, and I want to say For Your Eyes Only, there was a Russian agent. I think it was those two. I know it was The Spy Who Loved Me. Had a Russian agent working with James Bond, and it was played by Barbara Bach. And what I liked about the movies, the James Bond movies of the Roger Moore era, were the villains. When Sean Connery played James Bond, his villains were fantastical people that only James Bond could beat, and they were part of these secret organizations who nobody really knew about, and they were, you know, they had fantastic plots to take over the world, you know, but it was all tied into the Cold War. With these villains, you have, let me read some of these villains here. Kananga from Live and Let Die, played by Yaphet Kotto. Kananga was a glorified drug dealer. And he was a quality villain, and he had other plans, but it boiled down to the bare minimum. He was a glorified drug dealer. And that's a villain that every man can relate to, because they plague us daily. Christopher Lee, the immortal Christopher Lee, played Francisco Scaramanga from The Man with the Golden Gun. The man was an assassin. People were trying to get him to kill off James Bond, and that was the crux of that movie. And I don't know how you could have a better villain than Christopher Lee. He's just great. I mean, they tapped him to be Count Dooku versus Yoda. I mean, come on. You don't get much better of a villain than Christopher Lee. He was in the Lord of the Rings movies. He played Saruman. A really, really quality actor who played villains better than just about anybody else. At least that I know of. Richard Kiel played Jaws. Jaws was an assassin. Richard Kiel, if you're not familiar with him, he's like 7.5 feet tall or whatever. Big guy, big guy. And for this movie, he had steel teeth, and his method of killing someone was to bite them. At one point, there was a very thick cable, and there was a ski tram, I think it was. They had a big car on a cable car, and he bit through the cable trying to kill off James Bond. Michael Lonsdale played Hugo Drax. Hugo Drax was a corporate bigwig, and Hugo Drax had a plan to where he was going to use poison gas to kill off the world's population and repopulate it with people he deemed to be perfect. Yeah, dude was a nutball, but you know. Julian Glover played Christados in For Your Eyes Only. Steven Berkoff played General Orlov, and Louis Jourdan played Kamal Khan. Both of those from Octopussy. And keep in mind, this is at the end of the Cold War. Like I said, we're trying to transition from the enemy, the Russians are enemies and we hate them, to the Russians are just different people and we're trying to get along with them. And again, it was toward the end of the Cold War, and we were trying to build a bridge rather than a fence, as it were. And these particular villains were trying to capitalize on the end of the Cold War. That's what it boiled down to. They were trying to keep the Cold War going, and they were planning on killing a bunch of people to do it. That was the gist of that particular movie. Christopher Walken played Max Zorin in A View to a Kill. Max Zorin, the character, had ties to the Nazi Party of World War II. Who doesn't hate a Nazi? Come on. I mean, hate's a bad word, but you know what I'm saying. Nazis are pretty much enemies of every free-thinking person on the planet. It's one of those things. Everybody can relate to these villains, is what I'm getting at. And what we learned from this particular era of James Bond is that Bond will do whatever it takes to save the world. He will sacrifice himself or anyone else to get the job done, and he will work with anyone to save the day. In a number of these, Grace Jones played a villain in A View to a Kill, and he turned her against her employer, Max Zorin. The character Jaws, played by Richard Kiel, he ended up being a good guy. And I don't think Bond intended that to happen, but it worked. It was one of those things, you know. And again, like I said, he worked with Russians at least once, maybe twice. But my point is, in this particular instance, the Cold War was being put on the back burner, and there were more important things brought to the forefront as obstacles for Bond, as missions. So it's a little more relatable to the common man. But any of these movies are good. If you get the chance to watch them, they're really great. A lot of great lines, a lot of great stunts. This era also introduced the Bond stunt, and there's a lot of really great ones. There's a sheriff that was in 2 movies. He was in Live and Let Die, and then he was in The Man with the Golden Gun. And he was a little Louisiana sheriff, and my favorite line from Live and Let Die. This guy's one of them secret agent fellas. Secret agent on whose side? It was wonderful. You got to see the movie. Anyway, you guys get a chance, check these movies out. Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, A View to a Kill. And check out George Lazenby's movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Really great movie. Anyway, if you get a chance, check these movies out. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. You folks have a good day. God bless one and all.